We are back with another session of the Citizens Grand Jury. Larry, how you feeling?
Well, like I always say, as well as can be expected under communism, it gets worse and worse every day. I mean, of course, we're seeing what's going on now with this so-called Omicron variant, where the Democrats are continuing to assert total control over the American people, scaring them. And of course, social media and the cable networks are obliging because they get a lot of ad dollars. It increases their ratings. But this country basically is on its back. And that's what's so important about these citizens' grand juries, is because every day, at the expense of the American people, but for the profit of the cable television networks, becomes a scandal industry. As I write about in my book, It Takes a Revolution, Forget the Scandal Industry, which you can get at freedomwatchusa.org and online at all major booksellers, including Amazon.com, is that this has become entertainment. It's become a game. And while we play clips from Fox News, I want people to realize that that is not the be-all and end-all is to be entertained. We have to take real action. Our legal system is corrupt to the core. All three branches of government, the executive branch, the legislative branch, and of course the judicial branch, which is the most corrupt of all on the federal level, are responsible for the decline of this country and the fact that we're on our back. Let me make a gratuitous comment before we get into the citizens' grand jury too. It was a part of my podcast yesterday, and that is, don't expect the Supreme Court to overrule and to negate Roe v. Wade. They're not going to do that. You have 6 Republican justices on that bench, all establishment justices to different degrees. Thomas is probably the least establishment of the bunch because he knows what it's like. You know, he took the heat years ago. And who was responsible for that? Joe Biden, in smearing him and defaming him with Anita Hill. But they're not going to overturn Roe v. Wade. Maybe they tinker a little bit with it. And the reason they're not going to do it is because they are political hacks, just like the judges on the lower courts, is that they know that if it's overturned just a few months before the elections in the fall of next year, that their Republican friends have no chance of winning back the House of Representatives and the Senate. But of course, and the reason is because most people in this country, not the people that support us, Freedom Watch or America's Sheriff or Crowdsource the Truth, most people are very well, I would say, immersed in what they're doing, or they're uneducated. They say, oh, let the Republicans do it. We're going to do nothing. Well, I know people in retirement who say that, young people, middle-aged people, the same thing, who are conservatives. But the fact is that Roe v. Wade is very popular in this country. And I don't think people have recognized what the consequences of Roe v. Wade is and are. We have killed hundreds of millions of unborn babies. They're babies, and they're viable. And do you think that God's sitting around playing patty cakes, watching hundreds of millions of unborn babies being killed, and is not going to react? I would submit that what we're going through today with regard to this country, whether it's pandemics, whether it's the misuse of the Justice Department as a Gestapo, whether it's drug traffickers and human traffickers and disease people running across our border, whether it's the disaster in Afghanistan, whether you name it. This is a warning shot, I believe, by the Father and the Son, or the Father if you simply are Jewish and don't, believe in Jesus, as I do. I'm Jewish and believe in Jesus. But this is something that you have to take into account. You have to take into account in making your decisions. I think we've got some interruption here on the video.
Sorry.
Yes.
People joining, please make sure you keep your microphone on mute.
Yeah, so here's the thing, is that if you believe in the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not kill, if you believe that God has a role to play in our lives, if you believe that our government, as I do, is not just worthless, but is working against the American people. And we, of course, have our Third Continental Congresses, which you can find at freedomwatchusa.org and crowdsourcethetruth.com, and the need to declare independence and create a new government. But short of that, we need to mete out justice ourselves. And that's what's so important about this citizens' grand jury, because if we don't mete out justice, it's not just a question of watching this world crumble and be disintegrated. But if you do believe in God, you cannot think that he doesn't play a role in the dire state that we are in today. He's sending us a message. He's saying, shape up, or you're going to go the way of other ancient civilizations. We've hit rock bottom in this country, absolute rock bottom, not just with regard to a corrupt legal system and a corrupt government, but our ethics and morality, not just with regard to abortion, of killing hundreds of millions of babies, but also with regard to teaching things which are totally at odds with the teachings of God and his son in the Bible, whether it's gay marriage, whether it's homosexuality, whether it's transgenderism, whether it's dividing the races. I mean, you can go right down the line, critical race theory. We are defying him in every respect, and there is a price to be paid. So it is in the old book of Isaiah, it says that the tarnished city will be restored with the help of the counselors and the judges. Isaiah, read it. So God is looking to us to carry out his will. And that doesn't mean I'm some, quote, religious fanatic, unquote. You can read it for yourself. The words of God is inscribed by man, and it's happened before. So the biggest threat to this country, quite apart from the radical left, and you're going to see some of that today, quite apart from the federal judges, who are the biggest man-made threat in this country, including the Supreme Court justices, is ourselves. The fact that we are asleep at the wheel, that we need to wake up, and that we need to take our country back, not with words, but with action. And that's what we plan to do. And of course, as I've said, is that we have a judge. We are going to be trying Hunter Biden, Joe Biden, and James Biden in late January, not just for the bribery, which we're going to supplement today. We now have new information about Hunter Biden's bribery scams, which undoubtedly Joe Biden and James Biden are in on as well. But also with regard to Anthony Fauci, we'll be trying him in February. We'll be trying Robert Mueller for what happened, during the witch hunts. And we're going to be trying the federal judges in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia and its appellate court, the D.C. Circuit, who are subverting the rule of law or violating their oath of office. We'll get into that during this show, more examples of it. Because without the counselors and judges to return the tarnished city to the faithful city, as it says in Isaiah, we have no chance with regard to this country. But we ourselves must rise up. Even in the most left-leaning state in this country, California, there's a statute put forth by the California legislature that if you know of someone committing a felony, you have the right as a citizen to arrest them and to turn them over to authorities to carry out that law enforcement. We are not even suggesting to do that. What we are doing through these citizens' grand juries, under the rule of nature and nature's God, and when it coincides with man-made law, great. But we will follow the rule of nature and nature's God as our founding fathers did, as set forth in our Declaration of Independence. And we ourselves must hold the guilty accountable, as we did before 1870 when we had a Justice Department created on July 1st. We will do it. We will try people. We'll give them an opportunity to defend themselves. They can come December 15th. The Bidens are scheduled to plead innocent, not guilty, nolla contendery. If they don't show up, we'll enter a not guilty plea. We will then proceed to try them. They can appear and defend themselves. If they don't want to appear, we'll try them in absentia. We will then seek sentences, and we will seek to have law enforcement and the military carry it out. They will have legal process to do that. It will go beyond just simply a citizen's arrest. We ourselves are not arresting anyone, but we have the right to do so, of course, and we're going to ask law enforcement to carry it out. The police and the military have been maligned. They have been attacked. They've been killed. They've been dishonored. They have died in the line of battle, and they've been abandoned by both political parties. And remember, the Republicans knew what was going to happen in Afghanistan. They got national security briefings. They wanted it to happen. It was kind of like Muhammad Ali's rope-a-dope in a way. They lured Biden into committing these crimes. And I might add, just last week, I had filed a criminal complaint with the International Criminal Court in The Hague, Netherlands, and they acknowledged, you can see it on our website at freedomwatchusa.org, that the International Criminal Court has opened an investigation against Biden for crimes against humanity, in particular for that drone strike that wound up killing 10 innocent Afghan allies and 7 of their young children, notwithstanding, what he did with regard to the allies in general and our own armed forces. But I don't think the International Criminal Court is interested in that as much as killing 7 children. I'm actually not in favor of the International Criminal Court in many instances, but where you have a situation such as this, where it truly is a crime against humanity, there is worldwide jurisdiction, and they should carry out their investigation. They should indict Biden. They should have him arrested, and they should have him sentenced to life imprisonment. But we are not resting our laurels on that. We have our citizens' grand juries. We will carry them out here. It'll be a 2-step process. The ICC, as well as what we are doing. And I might add one other thing. We're doing other things at Freedom Watch. We have class actions against the Communist Chinese over COVID-19 and the variants. Chinese have been evading service of process for a year and a half. We are working on that to get them served. They were served. They rejected it. They have no respect for our legal system. They think we're a bunch of idiots, which, frankly, we are in large part, except the people that support what we're doing here and others of similar ilk. But they have no respect for our legal system. And the Republicans sit there and talk a good game, whether it's Tom Cotton coming on TV, pontificating, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, or Jim Jordan with his rolled up sleeves as if he's doing something, or Senator Lindsey Graham, who occasionally comes out of his closet to say something, but whatever's politically convenient for him, or the rest of them. It is why we, the American people, must now do it for ourselves. The Father and the Son will only help us if we help ourselves. That being said, I want to show the latest information to the citizens' grand jury regarding Hunter Biden with regard to the bribery dealing with cobalt, which is used in electric batteries, could be used for electric cars from China. Very, very serious. It buttresses the information for which Hunter Biden, Joe Biden, and James Biden have already been indicted. We know from Tony Bobolinsky, who came forward, who was Hunter Biden's partner for a while until he decided he didn't want to be part of some criminal racketeering enterprise, that 10% was to go to Joe Biden. And I'm sure it still is. This individual, Joe Biden, is not just stupid, he's not just brain dead, but he's pure evil, and he must be held accountable. And I'll tell you who else should be held accountable, his wife, Jill Biden, because Jill Biden knew that he was incapable of being president. She knew, living with him, that he simply was gone mentally. And she has put, over 300 million Americans and the world at risk for her own desire to be first lady. So she's going to wind up indicted too. It's just a matter of time by the citizens' grand juries. We need to hold everybody accountable. Jason, play this new information. There's a little clip that we took off of Fox News. Again, they love this because it boosts their ratings and advertising dollars. But the people that come on do nothing but talk. We are tired of talking. We want action. Roll the videotape.
Morning. New revelations this morning from Hunter Biden's laptop from hell, further linking him to China's payroll. That's according to the New York Post columnist Miranda Devine, whose new book, Laptop from Hell, which claims he received a 3-carat diamond and a $30 million offer to help a Chinese energy firm.
Our next guest has been calling out the media over their silence on Hunter's scandals. Unfiltered host Dan Bongino joins us now. Dan, so lots of lavish gifts, lots of money that he was paid for to make introductions to his dad. What do you think about this?
Well, here's the question everyone should be asking, which we've asked on this network for a while, me included. What the hell were they buying? No, what were they buying? Were they buying his legal expertise? Is he some kind of a rare gem guy? Does he have some kind of unique expertise into natural resources, including oil and petroleum reserves for the Ukrainian natural gas company? Has anyone in the media bothered, outside of this network and conservative media, has anyone bothered to ask why the son of the president of the United States seems to be the most valuable man in corporate America all around the world? Has anybody asked that? And guys, there's no excuses here as to why the media is still doing one of the biggest cover-ups in media history. Here, let me show you some. Here's the receipt. We have the receipt, guys. Here is the Hunter Biden receipt, signed by Hunter Biden. There's Hunter Biden's signature, billed to Hunter Biden with Hunter Biden's laptop. Here's another one. Wait, I got more. This is like a court exhibit. Don't go anywhere, fellas. Here's a picture of Hunter Biden. Of Joe Biden and Hunter. I even circled Joe for you. That's not part of the picture. That's my Sharpie. There's Joe Biden with Hunter Biden's business partners that he says he never met. There was this kid, Steve, you may know him, Peter Ducey. Yeah. He's got the same last name as you. He asked Joe Biden a question during the campaign. Hey, man, you have any conversations with your son over these business deals? Nah, none of them. There's the picture.
Right.
There's the picture.
Right.
There's Joe Biden in the picture. I mean, what else do you need to know to interview this guy and ask him serious questions?
You talk about serious. This China energy firm is tied directly to the Chinese government, and they're looking to push forward their Belt and Road program, which is the counter to American influence. They take these struggling countries hostage by giving them money and then extort them for their natural resources or their port access. And he's helping foment that. The other big story in Miranda Devine's book is the Cobalt Mind. We basically gave up the Cobalt Mine, which is cobalt is necessary for this clean energy and this battery power. We gave it to China because in 2013, involved in that sale is Hunter Biden. This isn't just a crack addicted son of a president. That's a personal story and a tragic one. This relates to American foreign policy and to our president. They want to make it about addiction. It's not.
You're right. And the Belt and Road Initiative, they're doing that now, by the way, with airports as well, even in Africa, where they're currently in the process of taking over an African airport now. They lent a bunch of money to, can't pay it back. This is all part of the plan, Brian. Now, it's interesting how the Democrats always talk about greed. You hear it often. They're actually blaming inflation now on greed and not Joe Biden. It's amazing how greed is just the worst it's been in 30 years under Joe Biden. Well, now you understand why, guys. Because the Chinese government understands Biden families, their proclivity for greed. They're really great at exponentially growing greed. Sure. They knew that. Do you blame the Chinese government for understanding Joe Biden's kid as a grifter and then taking advantage of it to leverage their power against the United States? This is a nuclear-powered enemy of the United States. Let's be crystal clear. But you blame them one bit for saying, hey, our intel sources show that this guy's family's full of grifters. Let's take advantage of it. Of course they did that.
Well, we did reach out to Hunter Biden's lawyer for a statement. We have not heard back. Don't hold your breath. Dan, thank you very much for joining us.
What a surprise, Larry. Hunter Biden not willing to make a statement.
Well, I guess maybe he's distraught because the supply side crisis has probably limited the supply of cocaine and meth. Okay, so he's probably very despondent these days. It's probably coming into withdrawal. But in any event, what this points out, and particularly about the Chinese, because the Chinese are very smart, okay? Chinese people are good people. We have, really fine Chinese Americans here and elsewhere. Don't blame them. It's the government. It's the butchers of Beijing. And they themselves are being persecuted over there, and killed for many, many years. The government was even killing female babies. They didn't want an excess number of females. And of course, the feminists have no problem with that if it's the Chinese. But in any event, we can do it here with abortion, of course. But the difference that really, tells the tale here is that Bongino serves a purpose. Okay, so do some people at Fox News, because they're propagating this and they're getting it out. And I commend them for that. But what I don't commend is the American people just relying upon words and no actions. Bongino is right. The Chinese, being very smart, they bought up utilities around this world. They control the Panama Canal. They control a lot of airstrips in the Caribbean. They control telephone companies, electric companies, et cetera. If they want to shut the world down, they can do it on short order. But the problem is this, is that sometimes you have to take risks. Our founding fathers took risks. The entire Chinese Politburo should already be indicted by now if the Justice Department was doing its job over COVID-19 and many other things. We will get to them next. We have civil lawsuits. But what Hunter Biden is doing, it's not Hunter Biden, it's Joe Biden. he is the front man. Someone who's been in Congress for 47 years, who's never had a private job in the public domain, does not become a millionaire unless he's taking bribes. And, just last week we saw him up in Nantucket. He was the man from Nantucket. I could do a little limerick on that, but I'm not sure he has anything to joke about in his pants, frankly. So this is something that needs to be said. It needs to be said. This guy is not just a grifter. He's a master criminal, and he needs to be held accountable. And the entire family is part of it, and they're going to be held accountable too. In my opinion, Joe Biden may wind up worse than the Clintons in the annals of criminality, the Bonnie and Clyde. Now let's play another clip that we have dealing with artwork. It's Tucker Carlson dealing with the same person, Miranda Devine, who wanted to get in to see the artwork of Hunter Biden. And, there's another fraud on top of a fraud here. I take a different take. These weren't finger paintings. These are paintings that were done by other artists. I mean, Hunter Biden does not have the capability of creating this artwork, which frankly, I thought was pretty good, not worth $500,000 for sure. But, this is another fraud. It's not even his artwork. They're defrauding the people who are trying to bribe Biden. There's some humor to this sad tale at all. Go ahead, roll the videotape.
Sorry, Larry, is that this one here?
Yes.
Okay. I just have a quick question before we roll the video. Bongino was talking about some very specific statements that are obviously lies. Joe Biden said he never met these people, but there's a photograph of them together. What context did he make those statements in? And is it okay for the president to just lie about something so substantial?
Well, we've taken the position that under the laws of nature, nature's God, and our citizens' grand jury with regard to Fauci, that if American citizens and others can get 10 years for every lie to the government, then government officials should get 10 years for every lie to the American people. So as far as we're concerned in our citizens' grand juries is that Biden will be held accountable for lying to the American people. So yeah, it's serious.
All right, let's roll the video here.
So again, let's say you were a crackhead through your 40s, made a lot of pornographic videos, mostly of yourself, your genitals covered in M&Ms, and then once you got to your 50s, decide, hey, I want to be Andy Warhol. I'm a highly paid pop artist. You probably couldn't do it unless your dad happened to be the president. And that's how Hunter Biden pulled that off. According to the New York Post, Hunter Biden has sold 5 of his finger paintings for $75,000 a piece. And now, of course, he's trying to sell more. Why wouldn't he? So Hunter Biden's art show just opened in Soho, which is a decrepit neighborhood in New York City. Miranda Devine is a highly non-decrepit columnist with the New York Post, and she attempted to visit Hunter Biden's Soho art show and lived to tell the tale. Miranda Devine joins us now. Miranda, thanks so much for coming on for your intrepid reporting venture to the art show. How'd it go?
Hi, Tucker. Well, unfortunately, I wasn't allowed in. I did try, but there was a very nice security guard out the front called Theo who said that I had to have an appointment. Now, I did try to make an appointment. I emailed Georges Berger, who's the gallery owner, and asked if I could have one of these exclusive viewings of Hunter Biden's paintings, but unfortunately, I got no response. So in the end, I went across the road to another art gallery, very high-end art gallery called the Martin Lawrence Gallery. And there I found that they have beautiful paintings by Picasso and Marc Chagall and Roy Lichtenstein and so on. And they are cheaper. You can buy a Picasso, a signed Picasso, for $400,000, which is cheaper than Hunter Biden's $500,000 paintings. So I think possibly that the people who are paying insane prices for Hunter Biden paintings and not really doing it for the art.
I wonder how many actual artists, talented people who've slaved away for years with no recognition and no income have seen this, decided to give up and jump off the Triborough Bridge. Any news on that?
Well, it's interesting you say that because one of the other gallery owners along that street in Soho in West Broadway that I knocked on the door of to see if they had any thoughts about it was saying, well, he had just been talking to an artist about the fact that Hunter Biden is getting enormous amounts of money, and this other artist has slaved for years to try and make a living with his art. And everyone's scratching their head and thinking it's very curious. And obviously, it's only because his father is president. That's the only reason that people are buying it, for the notoriety and potentially for the influence. Because, of course, we know that Joe Biden is partial to a bit of influence peddling in his family.
Yeah. Well, when your dad's president, you get superpowers. Maybe Hunter Biden will invent a new vaccine next. We'll be required to take. Who knows? You never know. The sky's the limit when your dad's in power. Miranda Devine, I appreciate what you've done for the sake of news and for coming on tonight. Thank you.
Well, that's
no end to the graft.
That's typical British humor. Okay, so British have a good sense of humor in a biting way. You can buy a Picasso for cheaper than you can buy a Hunter Biden painting. Okay,
but I think she's serious.
It tells you the story here, and don't think that Joe Biden and Jill Biden don't know about this. They're part of this scheme. And as I said, Jill Biden is going to be indicted too. I'm tired. If you're a woman, you have to play by the same rules as a man. Men don't deserve more rights than women, and vice versa. So she's going to be indicted too, and that'll be next week. But here's what we're talking about. We're talking about the endemic corruption in the American political and government system. What Joe Biden's doing on a massive scale is nothing that is limited just to Democrats. The Republicans do it as well. And McConnell does it, Mitch McConnell, who has taken money through his wife from communist China, his wife's family having big shipping interests in communist China, being very close to the Chinese Politburo. This is something which goes on, this influence peddling. And consequently, everybody needs to be held accountable. It's not just Democrats, also Republicans. And it points out why both political parties, one is inhabited by the devil, which is the Democrats. The other is a criminal racketeering enterprise that just rakes in more money and acquires more power. And then when they get power, as they hope to get next year, they do little to nothing. They continue with their fundraising. And it's just one example. Mitch McConnell now acknowledged this morning on Fox News that he's being inundated with communications saying, do not refund the government unless Biden takes the vaccine mandate monies that will push forward these illegal and unconstitutional vaccine mandates out of the budget. And he says, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm leaving that to the judges and the courts. So far, a few judges have said, well, the vaccine mandates are not legal because they didn't comply with the Administrative Procedures Act. In other words, notice and comment to let people be able to weigh in before they're promulgated as regulations or executive orders. And then they said some of them, a cop-out for federal judges, that, and we're going to get into the federal judges next, this is the segue, is that, well, it may be unconstitutional. Well, it is unconstitutional, but these judges know, even the Republican ones, Republican appointed, which are almost as bad as the Clinton and Obama and Biden judges. They know that if they take a strong stand, that the Democrats will block any appointment to a higher position later on, or try to destroy them as they have before. So these judges don't represent us. These judges are like the yes men on the court of St. James under the king. They were put on the bench primarily through forms of bribery, campaign contributions, and other grease applied by special interests and lobbyists. President Trump, as just one example, didn't know who he was appointing. He continues to brag about it. Somebody's got to wake him up, maybe like the scene in Moonstruck when Cher hits Nicolas Cage and says, snap out of it. Don't be in love with me. Judge Trump needs to stop being in love with his own judges because they are the absolute worst, along with the Democrat-appointed judges. They do not protect us. They serve their own interests. They're unaccountable as unelected. They gave themselves immunity, which will be taken away when we do some fine-tuning to our Constitution with our new government, when we declare independence. And they simply scratch the backs that put them in power. And frankly, whether you're a Democrat-appointed judge or Republican-appointed judge, you're the flip side of the same coin. It's more about you, your power, your standing in the establishment community of Washington, D.C. and throughout this country than about the American people. And that is why Thomas Jefferson said, and I write about it in my book, Takes a Revolution, Forget the Scandal Industry, He said, unelected, unaccountable to the people, federal judges and Supreme Court justices. He was against Article 3 in the Constitution, didn't want it enacted. With that, they would become despots and tyrants, causing us to shed the blood of patriots and tyrants yet again every 20 years. And then he added, what's a few thousand dead to refresh the tree of liberty? That's the natural manure, in French, shit, of government. So this is what we're talking about. And it's why what we're doing is so important, because we don't have a justice system that will protect the American people. It protects the elite and the powerful, and it protects themselves. And that applies to, some bar associations like the District of Columbia Bar and New York Bar that, try to take lawyers out that will challenge the system. They have with Giuliani, they have with Ted Cruz, they have with Josh Hawley, they have with William Barr. And frankly, these people weren't even threats to them, but they were making a point. And that's where we are today. There's some good bar associations out there, but these bar associations are pure evil, and they do the bidding of the radical left. So this is where we are. And this is what we need to consider in moving forward with the citizens grand jury. Now let's talk about the latest outrages out of the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia and its appellate court, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit, the two most corrupt courts in this country. If you think the Ninth Circuit's bad and the Northern District of California or the Southern District of New York and the Second Circuit, you ain't seen nothing until you really take a look at what's going on in the capital of corruption, the swamp, the District of Columbia. Now, here's just the latest, and let's put it up on the screen. This is an article from this leftist publication called Politico. Let's back up a little bit, Jason. Here we go. Stop there. Two federal judges are poised to quietly begin unlocking reams of January 6 secrets for Congress. The information from Donald Trump's White House files and from the rioters themselves could dramatically reshape the public's understanding of the insurrection. It's not an insurrection, it was an uprising. Written by Kyle Cheney, stop there, Jason, if you would, and Josh Gerstein. I have sued Josh Gerstein. He's defamed me before. He's a member of the Marxian Jewish left. He tries to present a good image. This guy, frankly, is an absolute disgrace, and he poses as being reasonable, but he does the bidding of the radical left. Now, let's take a look at this story, and I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to stop. Burl Howe, by the way, is the chief judge of the lower federal court, the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. This is a judge who, when I brought a case for Sheriff Joe Arpaio over the 5 million illegal aliens that Obama gave amnesty to, would not consider it, claiming, oh, it's only a political matter. Well, a judge in Texas, Judge Hainan, disagreed and enjoined that amnesty. Again, he didn't go far enough either. He said, well, it was a violation of the Administrative Procedures Act. He didn't reach the constitutional issues. Again, a cop-out. Went up to the Fifth Circuit in Louisiana. His decision was affirmed, and ultimately in a 3-3 tie, because Justice Scalia had died, that Fifth Circuit ruling went into effect. And Judge Arpaio and I, who participated in that case, along with some attorneys general in other states, we won. But no thanks to Burl Howe, who's a political hack. Now let's read, and in addition to that, during the witch hunt of Robert Mueller, I wrote to her and sent her a communication saying, you've got to look into the grand jury leaks that are destroying my client, Dr. Jerome Corsi, and others. To leak grand jury information is a crime. She didn't even have the courtesy to respond. Tanya Chutkan is one angry Black woman, a affirmative action judge, not terribly smart, frankly, and most Black people are smart, but she's not one of them, okay? And she was put on the bench solely because of her skin color and her sex, in my opinion. I can get into what I've done with her in my cases, probably some of the most stupid opinions I've seen in 55 years, totally politically drenched with hatred towards someone who's a conservative. But let's get into that on another day. Another prosecutor will present that one against her, what she did with regard to me, since I would have a conflict of interest there. But she doesn't care about conflicts of interest, and neither do the rest on the court. Let's read this article, and I'm going to comment as we go along. Most Americans haven't heard of Burl Howe and Tanya Chutkan. Well, unfortunately, I have. Yet these two federal judges are poised to help deliver troves of hidden information to congressional investigators over the next few weeks that could dramatically reshape the public's understanding of the January 6th insurrection. So you see Gerstein and his little hack friend, you can see how they've set this thing up. On Thursday, Chutkan, a 2014 appointee of President Barack Obama, well, that'll tell you something, will weigh former President Donald Trump's effort to shield his White House records from the January 6th Select Committee. Her ruling there could help lawmakers obtain call records, visitor logs, and highly sensitive files from Trump's senior aides. Never mind that there's executive privilege here, okay, which is well established. They don't care about that. She did rule against Trump. It went up to the DC Circuit on an emergency basis, and Clinton and Obama judges affirmed her ruling. No surprise. I don't need to get into personalities because they'll be indicted too at the time, right time and place, for violating executive orders and not adhering to their oath of office. In recent days, Howe, the chief of the U.S. District Court in Washington, D.C., and a 2010 Obama appointee, has implicitly encouraged January 6 defendants to cooperate with congressional investigators. Last week, she praised a convicted rioter, Leonard Grupo, for his decision to be interviewed by the Select Committee last month. Now, this is not the role of a judge. Stop there, Jason. This is not the role of a judge. Okay, this is the role of a prosecutor. She's simply to deal with what's put in front of her in terms of the alleged crime, not to go outside of that and to play a role as if she's a prosecutor, notwithstanding the fact these judges play roles as if they're legislatures. That's called judicial activism. Now, reading on, Howe sentenced the military veteran to home confinement and probation, saying he demonstrated genuine remorse, particularly by talking to members of Congress on the Select Committee to help deter other people with the specialized training you received in the military, not to turn it against fellow Americans. Several other rioters who have pleaded guilty are preparing to testify, and more may take cues from Howe's decision. She has criticized, as has Chutkan, the Justice Department, as well as other judges in that courthouse, Democrat and Republican appointed, for the Biden-Harris Gestapo not to charge more, okay, to turn simple misdemeanors like alleged trespassing, which I don't even believe was trespassing in many instances, into felonies. So she is playing an activist role in having these defendants make forced confessions. It's as if you are in Iran or North Korea or Russia when it was the Soviet Union. I would suggest that probably there's more justice in Russia these days than there is here, when you're being told you better walk the plank and admit your wrongdoing, or we're going to put you away for a very, very long time. And then the lawyers, they're as guilty as the judges, because then they're coercing their clients to make these forced confessions. We saw that with the QAnon shaman, who simply was dressed in a bizarre way, according to most conventions, and for being dressed that way, and he was walked into the Capitol, by the way, by Capitol Police. He gets 41 months in prison by a judge that I used to have respect for, Royce Lamberth. And he gets it because that's the way he dressed. But that's not the basis for a 41-month sentence. And he was forced to make confessions as well. Now, he's hired new lawyers, and he's appealing that on ineffective assistance of counsel. And in theory, he should win, but he won't win because the DC Circuit is highly leftist, highly corrupt, and the Republicans there are the flip side of the same coin. So anyway, let's get back to what I was reading, because it's very instructive, not just with regard to these judges, but also the role that the leftist media plays in twisting things so the American people do not truly understand what's going on. This is how the rioters attacking the Capitol. Oh, wait. Despite their relatively low profiles, Howe and Chutkan have used their courtrooms to help force national reckoning about January 6th. You see that the left loves this. Gerstein loves this. It can be illegal, but That's great. And to sound blaring alarms about the fundamental assault unleashed by these Trump-aligned rioters on American democracy. While House investigators fight to wring information out of Trump's confidants, the judges are complimenting and bolstering their efforts. It's not the role of a judge. And they're helping frame the stakes of the national debate as they do it. Of course, Gerstein loves this. The left loves it because they believe in dictatorships, leftist dictatorships. They're admirers of Marx. Gerstein, like I said, is a member of the Marxian Jewish left. Next. The rioters attacking the Capitol on January 6th were not mere trespassers engaging in protected First Amendment conduct or protests. Countless videos show the mob that attacked the Capitol was violent. Everyone participating in the mob contributed to the violence, House said at a sentencing hearing last week. That's despicable. That's a lie. That just shows you who this woman is. Excuse the French again, she's a POS. Quote, the damage to the Republican reputation of our democracy, which is usually held up around the world, but that reputation suffered because of January 6th. Yeah, it suffered just like our founding fathers suffered in declaring independence. It suffered just like the French suffered when they were forced to storm the Bastille after Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette said, after us, après moi le déluge, after me the flood, I could care less what happens to the French people. I'm going to rape and pillage the countryside. The hell with you. Yes. No, it didn't. Our reputation did not suffer. Our reputation was enhanced because it showed that we, the people, will rise up against tyranny in government. Next paragraph. For Hal, the attack on the Capitol hit particularly close to home. She served as a top aide to Senate Judiciary Committee under the chairmanship of Senator Patrick Leahy, a complete hack, a worthless hack, almost as brain dead as Biden, from 1993 to 2003. Leahy used to come up to me when I ran Judicial Watch like I was his great friend and shake my hand. I could never figure out why. I don't think the guy was lucid. God knows, maybe he was on the same crack as Hunter Biden. But this is the person who put Powell on the bench as head of the Judiciary Committee because Hal worked for him. Leahy, during her confirmation hearing in 2010, described her as, quote, one of the most effective members of our Judiciary Committee staff, unquote. Some of the cases she led in her subsequent career as a prosecutor, Leahy said, read like crime novels. Well, I would suggest that her behavior should be a novel in and of itself. Hal has noted in some of the January 6 cases before her court that the attack on her old office was partly visible from our courthouse's east-facing windows. She has channeled a sense of outrage as she described the alleged conduct of some of the rioters in her courtroom. Now that shows a conflict of interest. She is now relating what happened to herself. She is to make rulings as a judge and to take herself out of the picture, whether it dealt with her old office or not. Like Thomas Civic, who ripped away the badge and radio of DC police officer Michael Fanone, or in Italian Fanone, as he struggled to defend himself amid the riot. And she has pressed prosecutors in particular to more clearly articulate the threat that the January 6th attack posed to democracy, calling the Justice Department's approach almost schizophrenic at times. I would suggest her conduct is the threat to democracy, not the peaceful protesters of January 6th and thereafter. Okay, let's go down.
Briefly, you mentioned Senator Leahy there. I don't know if you've seen this photograph of Leahy with President Joe Biden and the former Attorney General. This is like a rogues gallery right here.
Oh, they're all friends. It's a circle jerk in Washington, D.C., and I'm not talking about Jeffrey Toobin either at this point. But this is what you got. They're all friends. They're part of the same club, Democrats and Republicans. That's why both political parties need to be sent to the ash heap of political history.
I think we should also remind our viewers that Senator Leahy was one of two members to receive anthrax in the mail after September 11th. Tom Daschle resigned. Leahy went on to have a prominent career as a hack.
Well, and what did they do about that? I represented at Judicial Watch the families who had loved ones die at the main post office in Brentwood as a result of the anthrax. You know, the white people on Capitol Hill, let me sound a little bit like Black Lives Matter here in reverse, is that they didn't give much shrift to Black people being killed at Brentwood. So I represented them. But if you gore the ox of a white elite Democrat or Republican congressman or senator, then it's a big deal. So yes, I mean, Sometimes there is discrimination, not to the extent as the communist-oriented Black Lives Matter would have it. But we use the legal system to try to redress that. But Leahy is a complete political hack. He's dishonest. He's a criminal. And this is the person who gave rise to Burl Howell. He was on the committee, the Judiciary Committee, when Biden chaired it, which tried to legally lynch Clarence Thomas over the BS that was put forth by Anita Hill. So, and I don't think Thomas doesn't remember that. So, you know, that's that. We talk about that and It Takes a Revolution, Forget the Scandal Industry, again, in my book, which has about 136 ratings. I haven't sold as many as Mark Levin because I don't have a radio show and I don't, you know, daily, and I don't pump it every 30 seconds, but it's done pretty well. And you can see
it's very well reviewed, Larry.
Huh?
Very well reviewed, mostly positive reviews. Look at that, 78% 5-star. And
well, thank you. And you wrote a nice review too. And the difference between my book and Mark Levin's, and you know, I bought Levin's too because I wanted to see what he had to say, is that I didn't need him to tell me that Marxism has taken over this country. His solution is boycotting and protesting. Well, that's fine, but we need to actually take our legal system back, and we need a new government. So he doesn't go far enough. So I hope you'll read my book too. Read his, and then read mine as well. And you judge for yourself who actually wants to make a change in this country rather than promoting himself on his radio show. So let's move on.
I think we should also remind our viewers and jury members, Larry, that people can make tax-deductible contributions to freedomwatchusa.org. And when people contribute $50 or more, they're going to get a gift copy of the book. Now's a good time to do it because it's a great stocking stuffer. We still have a few days left of Hanukkah. So whoever you might want to gift this to, now is the time to go to freedomwatchusa.org and make your tax-deductible contribution and receive a copy of the book.
Well, thank you, Jason. I appreciate that. And my primary motivation in writing the book was not to make money and but to educate the American people. And again, to educate the American people in a way that they would understand that they have levers of power that they can use for themselves beyond boycotting and protest, is that we actually own our country, we own our legal system, and we have the power outside of the corrupt courts to mete out justice ourselves. And that's what we're doing here today. Yeah. That is our right, and that's what our founding fathers did, and they were unafraid, and they understood that unless they would take action, that their children, grandchildren, and future generations will be living in a dictatorship. Well, it has come to pass. We are now living in a dictatorship. We've got one political party that has total control. We got the other one who just wants to make money and get reelected. We are left defenseless. The only thing we have is God. And God is looking at what we're doing right now, and he's saying, you know, frankly, you're not following my word, and you're going to pay the price. Either you shape up American people, or I'm going to make sure you ship out. That's my view of things. I really believe that. So in any event, let's then proceed with this article by our little friend Gerstein.
Exactly. Well, back to the Gerstein. Sorry, I thought it was done. Because wait a second. Sorry, we're not in the usual studio today, so I don't have my...
Right, no, take your time.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting article because it tells you a lot of things, okay? Even if it's...
There we go, yeah.
Even if it's slanted for the left. Okay, Howell has also chastited prosecutors for declining to challenge the decision of the federal appeals court that facilitated pretrial release of rioter Eric Munchell, who appeared in a now famous photo careening through the Senate gallery wielding zip ties. Doesn't say that he hurt anybody, but she's got a problem with that. Howell has made clear she views her role partly as helping force more facts about the insurrection into the public domain, not her role. She doesn't have a Freedom of Information Act request in front of her, nor any other valid legal process that gets her to play the role of a prosecutor. She has pressed for the public release of surveillance footage closely held by the U.S. Capitol Police, as well as other videos relied upon by the prosecutors. She has pressed defendants themselves to articulate the reasons they entered the Capitol, going beyond what most other federal judges have asked of defendants in their courtrooms. Now, she hasn't asked them for an honest response. She has told them, I'm going to put you away unless you agree with me and make a forced confession. She's like a terrorist sitting, she's like ISIS, frankly, and analogously, sitting with a sword on top of these people's heads saying, I'm going to cut your head off unless you say what I want you to say. Quote, she, I'm sure, of course, feels deeply the offenses that took place on January 6th, the breach of our constitutional system and traditions, said Ronald Welsh, Weich, or whatever he is, a longtime aide to then Senate Democrat leader Harry Reid. By the way, Harry Reid, the most dishonest and corrupt senator in modern history, someone who tried to sell the Bundys' land reportedly out from under them, you guessed it, to the communist Chinese, obviously wanting to get kickbacks for it. Quote, it was traumatic to watch that, having been many times in those hallways. I'm sure Judge Howe had the same kind of reaction, but she knows the judge has to put her emotions aside and nonetheless would feel acutely the outrageous breach of that occurred. Actually, the opposite. She did not put her emotions aside. This guy's a complete hack, but of course he serves the purpose of the card-carrying member of the radical Jewish left, Josh Gerstein. Howe has also earned respect from defense attorneys for some of the rioters, even as she excoriated their clients for their actions on January 6th. This tells you something about lawyers. They protect themselves just like judges, just like prosecutors. They don't really represent their clients by and large, they represent themselves. Grupo's attorney, Daniel Lindsay, a real piece of work, said he appreciated that Howe understood his client's assertion that his presence at the Capitol was driven by Trump himself. He called Howe, quote, a brilliant jurist with a photographic memory. I guess oral sex is required to get what you want with Burl Howe. Reading on. She has also rankled others, however, with her pointed lines of questioning. An attorney for Glenn Croy, one of more than 100 rioters who have pled guilty to misdemeanor crimes for their actions on January 6th, said Howe's intimidating tone during Croy's plea hearing caused him to incorrectly state that he intended to disrupt Congress' session that day. That speaks for itself. Quote, undersigned counsel means no disrespect to the court, unquote, wrote the attorney, Kira West. Quote, but the plea colloquy in this case was the toughest in nearly 30-year criminal prosecution and defense career of the undersigned counsel. Well, that's quite diplomatic, isn't it? And she went further than the other lawyers, but certainly not far enough. Now we get to Chutkan, frankly, who doesn't have the power of Howe because Chutkan is an ordinary judge. She has quite a lot of power, I might add, because she can destroy people's lives, but she's not the chief judge. Chutkan, like Howe, has used her courtroom to reject efforts by defendants to minimize what occurred on January 6th. She excoriated Troy Smocks, who was Black, for claiming that racism played a role in the prosecutor's decision to detain him for issuing social media threats of violence against lawmakers related to January 6th. Actually, this is Gerstein trying to be cute because he picks a Black person to try to suggest that Chutkan is somehow neutral and not racist. Chutkan is racist, okay? You'll see what I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. Chutkan hates whites, and she hates white males in particular. She even hates Trevor McFadden, who's a lousy judge in his own right, chosen by Donald Trump. But here, Gerstein is trying to say, well, she even went against a Black person, okay? So this is the game they play. Quote, he went to the Capitol in support of one man, not in support of our country, unquote. Chutkan said of defendant Carl Mazzocco, one of the few clear Trump references that judges had made as they consider cases. Here we come. This shows you who Chutkan is. Quite apart from my experience that we'll get to some other day. Chutkan's comments in that case came days after Judge Trevor McFadden, a Trump appointee, by the way, a white Irish Catholic, questioned the government's approach to January 6 cases and wondered whether they would have taken a different one towards the riots that accompanied racial justice protests in D.C. over the summer of 2020, referring to Black Lives Matter, which now has its own plaza on 16th Street, Black Lives Matter Plaza. Chutkan, who said she had been listening to comments of other judges had made in these cases, rejected the comparison. Rather, she said, January 6 defendants have been treated arguably more gently than those charged over the summer, since the pro-Trump rioters were not arrested on the spot and were permitted to participate in their proceedings remotely. Many, she noted, have received single-count pleas despite facing multiple charges. Well, obviously we know that's a total lie. Black Lives Matter busted up the country. They assaulted people. They killed people. They're communists, but of course, Chutkan has a little problem with that. She'd rather go after a white Irish Catholic judge who in his own right is a terrible, dishonest judge. And you can read about him in my book, It Takes a Revolution, Forget the Scandal Industry. Trump appointed, by the way. She's the one that dismissed the case we brought, Freedom Watch and Laura Loomer against big tech, which went to the Supreme Court, where Justice Thomas ultimately said it was a good case, but then didn't have the guts enough to say that it should have been considered by the Supreme Court. The rest of them, of course, bailed out completely, including the other 5 so-called conservative justices on our disgraceful Supreme Court. Okay, so let's roll back to the article. But Chutkan's most consequential moment may come Thursday, when she presides over a hearing in Trump's lawsuit aimed at blocking the National Archives from sharing his White House records from congressional January 6th investigators. I might add that others have sought records from those archives that were subject to presidential privilege under Clinton and were denied, including yours truly. Those records, including hundreds of pages culled from the files of former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, advisor Stephen Miller, and counsel Patrick Philbin, not to be confused with Regis. They include call and visitor logs, speech drafts, and memos that the archive said were directly relevant to House investigators. Archivist Daniel Ferriero plans to ship a first batch to lawmakers on November 12th unless a court intervenes. How convenient, a government person taking matters into his own hands, despite the assertion of executive privilege by President Trump. Chutkan hasn't indicated where she'll land on Trump's efforts. You don't need to indicate it. We know she's already landed against Trump as of the date of this citizens' grand jury. But legal experts say they're confident she'll see no merit in Trump's unprecedented and expansive view of executive privilege for a former president. Of course, legal socialist, communist, and leftist experts in Washington, D.C., they're about as frequent as people laying on grates, unfortunately. They say her decision to put his case on a rapid timetable is a clue to her thinking. Quote, I think we're seeing a similar sense of urgency from Chutkan expressed initially in the schedule, which is very aggressive, said Norm Eisen, a former advisor to House Judiciary Committee, who has co-signed a brief urging Chutkan to redirect Trump's case. Another member of the Marxian Jewish left, Norm Eisen. I know my soul brothers when I see their names. You probably don't. Quote, she's been outspoken previously about January 6th, about the conduct, including the plea hearings and sentences where January 6th defendants have admitted their misconduct. I anticipate that we will hear a similar sense of the importance of moving briskly when she takes the bench on Thursday, unquote. By the way, I don't want anyone to misinterpret my criticism of the Marxian Jewish left to the Jewish people. The Jewish people are primarily conservative oriented. They believe in God. They believe in the 10 Commandments. They believe in the rule of law. The Jewish left is trying to destroy Israel. They're trying to destroy conservative and libertarian Jews. Of all the people who have written defamatory articles against me in the last 30 so years, almost 30 years since I founded Judicial Watch, they've been members of the Jewish left like Gerstein. They hate me.
Real quick.
Yeah.
Sorry, Larry.
Right.
We should also add that this article was written in November and that these decisions have already come down. Judge Chutkan indeed denied President Trump's attempt to exercise executive privilege.
Of course. She didn't care about the law. They have immunity. They're there for life. They don't care. And this way she increases her standing. Maybe she'll get to the D.C. Circuit someday, like Judge Ketanji Jackson, who's a complete idiot, African-American, affirmative action judge. I was in front of her early on in the Bundy case dealing with the Freedom of Information Act. She didn't even know what the Freedom of Information Act was, by and large. So Biden elevates her to the D.C. Circuit. Now she's rumored to be the replacement for Stephen Breyer on the Supreme Court for 2 reasons. She's a female and she's black. That's it. Okay. Now there are plenty of black people out there who are jurists, who are qualified, who deserve to be there, but not this one. Okay. And this is what we're dealing with. Chutkan's similar, affirmative action judges. Okay, next. The only remaining question, Eisen said, is whether the D.C. Circuit or the Federal Appeals Court and even potentially the Supreme Court will permit a ruling against Trump to stand without a lengthy review. Well, the D.C. Circuit's already ruled against Trump, too. 3 hack Obama and Clinton and Biden judges already shot it down. I sent out a press release the other day on that. You can see it at freedomwatchusa.org. Judge Millett, who is very close to being a communist in her ideology, Judge Wilkins, and one other judge whose name escapes me right now, but all radical leftists. How those courts respond may be one of the most crucial moments in the success of the January 6th committee. Quote, I would say that the decision of Judge Chutkan and the appellate courts that I predict will give the back of the hand to Trump's argument, and the timing of those decisions are the most consequential outside factors for the committee's functioning, he said. Who said that again? Jason, let's scroll up. Eisen. Okay, great. So there you have it. Okay. Now let's layer that on top of what the other judges in that court are doing without exception. They're throwing, and we went through that in the last grand jury session, and they're going to be indicted too. All of them are going to be indicted. Mass indictment. And it grows every single day. We haven't actually finished the written indictment yet, but we will very soon and present it to the citizens' grand jury. They have violated their oath of office. And we'll throw that up again at the end of this the proceeding, Jason, and read it so people will understand. It's under oath. So when you violate that, you commit a crime, since it's under oath. And of course, they're doing other things in terms of subverting, our country. I think it's sedition as well. They'll be indicted for that as well. They're subverting the Constitution. But you've got Judge Royce Lamberth, who threw somebody else in prison for 41 months, who said, in throwing the initial person in an earlier arraignment, that one must obey the established government. Well, our founding fathers did not obey the established government. Okay, when the government acts in a tyrannical fashion, the American people have a duty and a right to rise up. And here, there may have been some people on both sides who went too far. Maybe they destroyed some property or assaulted someone. That was not the majority. The overwhelming majority of people there were peaceful. And they were let in by Capitol Police, and that's our Capitol. And even assuming that there's any validity to a trespass, which I do not believe there is, that does not warrant 41 years in prison, even for the shaman, even if you don't like the way he dresses or the way he behaved. That is not your job to decide. 41 months, yes. And then to give it to another one, or to sentence someone as Lamberth did recently. And again, I used to respect Lamberth based upon the fact that, or maybe it was Burl Howell again, I may be wrong here, that he arranged for a bus trip from Pennsylvania of 200 people to attend the Capitol gathering on January 6th in support of President Trump. That is not a basis to give them a harsher sentence or to sentence them at all. And I can go on and on and on and on, and we will detail it. But I call you back to the basic principle. And there's Judge Lamberth. Judge Lamberth is doing what he thinks is right, but unfortunately he's deluded. Okay. And he's been critical of me over the years too. I mean, he wanted to distance himself sometimes to preserve his own standing in the establishment, but he did some good things. And I thank him for that. You can read about it in my book, Horrors, Why and How I Came to Fight the Establishment. And also, It Takes a Revolution, Forget the Scandal industry. But he's become the best of the worst because he is protecting this system that allowed him to rise from an assistant U.S. attorney to a judge. He's part of the establishment. He plays cards with John Roberts. I know he's told me that. They're all part of this group of judges who think that they're all powerful, that they're privileged. They gave themselves immunity again, and they get to decide what's best for the American people. They don't get to decide what's best for the American people. They get to decide pursuant to the law, and that's it, and not to go outside the law. And when that law is unjust, there was another judge, Judge Stanley Sporkin, who died about a year ago. He was a great judge because when he understood, and there were some, and sadly he's not here anymore, but when he decided that the law was unjust, he would find a way around it legally to protect the little guy, not the elite of Washington, D.C. He had his establishment tendencies too. I talked to him. But on the other hand, Judge Sporkin had a really good heart, and he understood human nature. But he understood that laws that are unjust should not be enforced, and that the legislature sometimes can enact a law which is unjust. And even if it is enforced, the American people have the right to stand up against it, just like our founding fathers stood up against the unjust edicts of King George III. Just like Judge Roy Moore, my client in Alabama, although he never ordered other judges not to obey the Supreme Court with regard to his decision on gay marriage. But he stood up against it. He said, I'm not going to countenance this. There's nothing in our Constitution that allows for gay marriage. It doesn't exist. There's nothing in our Constitution that allows for abortion. It doesn't exist. You just can't make things up. And, the American people sometimes will need to rise up against unjust laws. And our founding fathers did, and I keep repeating that, is that when in the course of human events, I'm paraphrasing, the sovereign, the rulers, no longer represent the people under the laws of nature and nature's God, not the law of the king, not the law of the state, the law of nature and nature's God, have a right to alter or abolish that government and to form a new government by and for the people with equal rights for everyone in pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. Our founding fathers pledged their honor, their sacred honor. They risked their fortunes and their lives to form a new nation. They did it at a time when King George III simply wanted to overtax us to pay for his empire. When we rebelled at Boston with the Boston Tea Party and did other things that were in protest, then he sought to take away our guns. That gave rise to the Second Amendment. It gave rise to the militias being put into the Second Amendment, the right to commission militias to protect ourselves against a tyrannical government, not against ourselves. And it gave rise to the king taking our legal system back, the criminal justice system, to the court of St. James. King George III, I'll take him any day over what we've got in power now, Democrats and Republicans. King George III was not a socialist. King George III was not a communist. King George III was not a radical black. He was not a member of the radical Marxian Jewish left. He was not a radical gay, lesbians, transgender, or transsexual. He was not a radical atheist. What we have in control of this country are radicals who want to destroy capitalism, want to destroy democracy under a free system. They want to impose a leftist dictatorship. And these judges now are furthering that because they believe that their power structure is going to be affected by Americans who are rising up to object. What happened on January 6th was not just the result of an election that people perceived to contain undue irregularities and fraud. It was a result of a recognition among a significant portion of the people that our country, all three branches of government, are corrupt to the core, totally corrupt. A stage 4 terminal cancer patient. And they rose up, and they did so primarily peacefully. They didn't do it like the French did it at the Bastille in a bloody way. They did it peacefully, but it was a warning shot across the bow. Excuse me, I'm itchy. A warning shot across the bow that things will get bloody if things don't change. And I'm not advocating that, and neither are you, Jason, or anyone. And that's why we are using citizens' grand juries, and we're using Third Continental Congresses to form a new government. We will form a new government. I'm in the process of creating a new political party separate from Freedom Watch, from americassheriff.org, which I formed with Sheriff Joe Arpaio to protect the police and to further law enforcement and law and order in this age of crime, which also is the result of the left wanting to destroy the country, destabilizing it. So this is where we are right now. And if you think you can go into retirement, if you're my age, I have people say to me, Larry, you're 70 years old now. Why don't you just take it easy? Don't take it to heart. You can't do anything about this. Let the Republicans do it. Well, if you believe that, then you're as guilty as the people who are committing these crimes against our country. And if you think you can just walk away and enjoy your retirement and say, okay, I'm going to reap the fruits of all the hard work that I did in my life, sit there counting your shekels, investing in the stock market, of course, that's crashing now too, or anything else, then you are as guilty as the people who are destroying this country. And if you're a middle-aged person, then you better recognize that you're not going to make it to senior status, because this country won't exist. And if you're a young person, you got to be particularly frightened to death, because things are going to get much worse for you than they ever were for yours truly, the guy who's sitting here right now. And they already are worse for you. So it's time for the American people to rise up. And what we saw on January 6th was simply a mild manifestation of discontent compared to where it's going to go if we don't arrest the decline that we are in right now. I would say that we are about 90% gone as a country. That's my opinion. I've said this before. It's like we're sitting on the deck of the Titanic listening to chamber music. The ship of state has already hit rock bottom. Maybe there's a little oxygen left for the people that are in Davy Jones's locker, but there's not much oxygen left. And when you have federal judges who are rubber stamping what the tyrannical government wants, you are in a very dangerous situation. And this is why Jefferson predicted correctly that federal judges would become the biggest threat to freedom and democracy in this country. And you can see it. And that's why they're all going to be indicted in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia and the D.C. Circuit. They're going to be held accountable. We'll show more mercy to them than they've shown to us. But there needs to be some consequence, and I'm not going to suggest that they be persecuted and prosecuted because of the clothes that they wear or the fact that they transported some people to an event or the fact that, they've made some statements or wore a Trump T-shirt in entering into the Capitol. People have been punished for that as well, or a flag, "Don't tread on me," a revolutionary flag. These judges are the absolute biggest threat to this country. They know it. They know that the people will be coming for them. That's why a chapter of my book, and I say it figuratively, not actually, because I don't want to see it happen in actuality, but federal judges first to the guillotines, because they have subverted our country in a major way. And one last point, Jason, is that I see this every single day. There's this case, and I write about it in my book, It Takes a Revolution to Forget the Scandal Industry, called Bell Atlantic versus Twombly. And you know what I'm talking about. These federal judges believe that they get to decide whether a case is a good case or not before it even goes to the jury. Bell Atlantic versus Twombly has what lawyers call dicta in it. It means that if there's any plausibility to a complaint, a federal judge must allow that case to proceed to discovery and possibly to a jury. He cannot cut it short. It's not for him to decide what's a valid claim and not a valid claim, as long as you pled in the complaint a valid claim that has some plausibility. But these federal judges, becoming despots and tyrants, have said, we get to decide what's plausible or not, and we're not going to let it go to the jury. And we don't care if you meet the standard of Bell Atlantic versus Twombly, that there's some plausibility at all. We're going to make the ultimate decision. And that's why you'll see in my book, It Takes a Revolution, I go through these judges who've dismissed cases on that basis, and then the appellate courts affirm them. These judges think they're God. They are not God. They're more like the devil. They're more like the Democrats that are inhabiting this country. They have no right to subvert the jury system. And they have no right to subvert the role of the legislature, the will of the people, to enact laws. Jefferson, and I just realized it this week, I was reading this, I actually missed it in my research about Jefferson. They didn't teach it at Duke University or at Emory Law School. Jefferson, after Marbury versus Madison, tried to shut the Supreme Court down. That was the case which said that judges could make rulings as to whether laws were unconstitutional or not. Jefferson was even against that because he understood that they would come up with their own concept of constitutionality, not the concept of what's in the Constitution that the founding fathers recommended. And he said, leave the decisions to the legislatures to decide what's best for the people. And that's true today, whether it's gay marriage, whether it's abortion, whatever. And I would say that legislatures who say that abortion's okay, they're committing crimes as well. But the first decision, the decision-making process is by the people. Everything for Jefferson was by the people and for the people, not a tyrannical government. And Jefferson said, when the people fear the government, there's tyranny. But when the government fears the people, there's liberty. And you're seeing that now because The government is fearing the people. And that's why their hack judges, their yes men and women judges, are carrying out what they can do to prevent the government from fearing the people, because they know the people, frankly, are at the point, as they were in France, ready to lop their heads off, which I'm not suggesting happens. But if it continues on as it has, more and more people will reach the conclusion that a bloody revolution is the only solution in this country. And I don't want to see that happen, and I will do my best to prevent it. So that's why these citizens' grand juries are very important. And it's why, frankly, you need to play a role, get up off the couch, turn off Sean Hannity, stop being entertained, and get to work.
You know, you raised a few points, Larry, that caught my attention. There's a term I've heard that I think I've just realized right now. I mean, it's sort of clear, but talk about legislating from the bench is sort of like when the judge just makes up their mind about what the law is and passes it on down. And I was going to ask you about the possibility of jury nullification, but I guess these defendants are never seeing a jury if they accept a plea agreement.
That's right. Well, jury nullifications is a valid concept. And when a jury sees that a law is unjust and that prosecutors have behaved in a tyrannical way, they will not vote to convict. And I'll give you an example. My clients, the Bundys, I didn't represent them in this proceeding. They represented themselves when they were indicted in Oregon for occupying a game reserve and trying to assist in protest. A rancher who was having his ranch taken away from him by the Bureau of Land Management under Obama. They were indicted for that. And at the same time they were indicted, the FBI, an agent, shot one of the peaceful protesters in cold blood in the back, Lavoy Finnegan. And anyway, our clients, it was Ammon and Ryan Bundy, represented themselves in that case. It was before I stepped in later at their request, and they got the jury to throw the whole damn thing out and themselves. And of course, it was Ryan and Ammon that played a significant role in the later prosecution in Nevada. Ryan uncovered in going through the various documents that had been produced. Many of them were withheld. It was a violation of Brady material by the prosecutors. But he played a role in uncovering that, in fact, the government had lied that there were no sharpshooters around the Bundy ranch. They actually sent paid assassins, mercenaries, I believe, to kill the Bundys. They wanted the Bundys to react, but the Bundys didn't take up arms, and they did it peacefully. But if they had lifted their arm once with a gun, they would have been shot dead, even though it was their right to do so, being surrounded by these government sharpshooters. So this is where we are. The Bundys case really foretells where we are in this country. And it was a significant case, which is why I got involved in it. And it was the best example in modern history of the American people standing down a tyrannical government. And the government fought hard to convict them. And even when Trump became president, Trump's own Justice Department allowed for the U.S. attorney in Nevada, who committed all kinds of crimes. Of course, they're not held accountable because they're not held accountable at all. They have so-called immunity too. That the Trump Justice Department took an appeal to the Ninth Circuit. Can you believe it? With the Bundys. At the same time that Trump was supporting the Bundys, his own Justice Department tried to stab the Bundys in the back as they later stabbed Trump in the back. And it went all the way up to the Ninth Circuit, and the Ninth Circuit, whatever the criticism of the Ninth Circuit, is 100 times more integrity, which isn't saying much, than the DC Circuit, and they affirmed. But they wouldn't take any action to discipline the prosecutors because it's all part of the same club. So that tells you something.
That's actually the case where you and I met, Larry. I was covering the trial and interviewed you afterwards. And the rest, as they say, is history. We're almost out of time for today. So I think we're going to spend some more time next week discussing Hunter Biden's really, truly troubling business arrangement with the Chinese. Miranda Devine's new book is bringing out even more details. But I hope our audience and members of the grand jury will contemplate over the coming week how incredibly important this is. Because while we have Joe Biden and the radical Democrats in Congress and all over Washington, D.C., virtue signaling about the so-called Green New Deal, they're not really helping anyone understand the details of what will power these electric cars and how electricity will get into them by Hunter Biden securing rare earth minerals for the Chinese around the world, specifically cobalt, and now we've heard about lithium. We are witnessing what may be in the near future a very important strategic shift in terms of the balance of power of control of energy on this planet. We've heard a lot of people talk about how terrible it is that the United States is engaged in wars all over the Middle East to control really the master resource, which is energy and is primarily derived from oil. As we make this really sort of tectonic shift to electric power and battery powered devices, control of these minerals is going to dictate a lot more than just who gets to earn money. If you can't run your car, and we know Tesla is already showing semi-trucks that are going to run on batteries, this Green New Deal, in addition to burning trillions of dollars that the United States simply doesn't have, is poised to put our most important strategic resource right into the hands of our most aggressive enemy.
Right. And it's not just cobalt, of course, lithium, which is prevalent in Afghanistan, has now been handed over to the Chinese too, because they moved immediately after we abandoned Afghanistan into that void. So yes, the Chinese are very smart. They own energy companies around the world. They own the Panama. They are running the Panama Canal. They have a very long lease on that. They own military facilities in the Caribbean. They're checkmating us. Their technology now in many areas is far superior to our own. They've stolen everything that we have, and then they've improved it to the point that now have hypersonic weapons in space, you name it. And basically, we've got a brain-dead moron as president of the United States, and we have no way peacefully to get rid of him, and I'm not suggesting we do it otherwise. But that's another reason to declare independence and to come up with a method to remove presidents. We cannot survive another 3 years of Biden and Harris. We will not be around in 3 years, given the way things are going.
I hope we have time to turn it around still, Larry. You know, one last note on the virtue signaling environmentalist posers in Washington, D.C. The transfer to electric cars and the amazing surging demand for minerals like cobalt and lithium are subjecting children of the third world nations where those minerals reside to toxic conditions that are certainly reducing their lives. A lot of articles about the cobalt mining industry in Congo, where 60% of that mineral, you know, all the world's supply of that mineral is. This article is telling us that 70% of the cobalt comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo. I've been reading stories, Larry, about young children who are forced to work in dangerous mines, total lack of regulation in these countries, strip mining on the industrial level that's destroying the ecology and ruining the environment there. So I think it's important that people who are serious about the preservation of the environment and our freedom as a democratic republic here in the United States need to consider all these factors. Just because you might be able to purchase a Tesla and not have to put gasoline in it, that's not the beginning and the end of the story. There's an entire supply chain and a whole lot of complicated technical things that go into making those cars, powering those cars, and keeping them sustainable. The other thing, Larry, is, you know, right now I believe electric vehicles make up something on the order of about 1 to 5% of all the vehicles in the world. When we talk about making this type of radical shift to every motor vehicle and every airplane running on batteries, this is such a substantial shift. It's going to have all kinds of implications that we don't yet understand.
There's another scandal brewing, is that many people believe that we have technology far superior to electric vehicles. Okay? Many people believe that we reverse engineered things that we learned at Roswell with the crash of an alien craft. That and you know, and this sounds fantastic, but you know, our so-called government claims they can't figure out all these UFOs that are flying about at hypersonic speeds that, you know, many people surmise are coming from outer space. But the question is, are they coming from ourselves? I'll tell you a story again that I related in a prior proceeding at Crowdsource the Truth, or one of our citizens' grand juries. I'm walking out of the prison in Pahrump, Nevada, having visited Clive Bundy. I visit him frequently. I was there between 30 and 40 times during this whole ordeal. And a prison guard's walking out next to me. And the Pahrump is in the desert. It's about 60 miles outside of Las Vegas, desolate. And I say to him in a friendly way, I say, boy, this is the modern day Alcatraz. You don't have San Francisco Bay, you've got desert and rattlesnakes. And he says to me, because I gotten to know the guards, Mr. Klayman, what scares me are not the rattlesnakes, but the UFOs I see every single night. Well, that is Area 51. That's our secret military facility. So the question is, what technology do we have that has not been given to the American people, whether we got it by reverse engineering an alien craft or whether we developed it on our own, that could change the world energy-wise? And, it's another story. We can do a show on it. Where did the name Tesla come from? He was a revolutionary, brilliant scientist. And after he died, many people think that his laboratories were raided by the oil companies to take his discoveries off the market that would have revolutionized the energy industry. So these electric cars are primitive. That's where I'm getting to. They're primitive. And, and Biden wants to invest in 500,000 charging stations, which will be obsolete, shortly. You're going to spend all that money for that. Why is it, and this isn't terribly new technology, why can't you make a solar powered car that would recharge the batteries? I mean, this is all feathering the nest of interests that get their hooks into our politicians to push, certain projects. Let's take a look at also just the situation now. We're getting a little bit off point with the Omicron variant. Okay. Before anybody knows, they continue to push the vaccines on the American people. The vaccines don't work. There has been a case of the Omicron variant discovered in San Francisco today. And it turns out that that person was vaccinated twice and had a booster shot. And he got the Omicron virus. Okay. And we don't, first of all, know what it is, but yet they continue to push the vaccinations when the damn stuff doesn't even work to begin with, number one. Number two, you don't know the short, medium, and long-term effects. They're pushing it on kids, and female kids may prevent them from having kids in later life or have mutant kids, as the case may be. They don't care because it's a profit-making machine. A question was raised, I was watching this morning some show, which was a good question, is why haven't these vaccine makers tweaked the vaccine with regard to the Delta variant? And of course, now the issue comes up with Omicron. Well, they didn't want to because that cost money. So they kept pushing it on people, selling trillions and trillions of dollars worth of vaccines, and the politicians help them do it. And mark my words, the politicians, many of them are getting kickbacks from Big Pharma. So listen to Bobby Kennedy, as I said, again, on our radio show. You can watch last week's radio show at freedomwatchusa.org. And the criminality of Biden. He has a financial interest in these vaccines. And that's why when Peter Doocy asked him a question, should people be tested who are taking airplanes? And he says, yes. And then Peter Doocy follows up and says, well, what about people running across the border? Fauci said, oh, that's a different situation.
Yeah. Fauci's
it's
a disaster, Larry.
He's more than a disaster. He's a criminal. And listen to Bobby Kennedy talk about it. Only Kennedy could talk that strongly and not be knocked off of YouTube and the rest. So it's unbelievable.
Well, Larry,
that's where
thank
we
you
are.
For another excellent session of the Citizens Grand Jury. I want to thank our grand jurors for joining us. And I want to remind our viewers that they can support you and your team at Freedom Watch by going to freedomwatchusa.org and tap on the donate button. People who make a tax-deductible contribution to the 501c3 in an amount of $50 or more are going to receive a gift copy of Larry's book, Forget the Scandal Industry, It Takes a Revolution. I got that in reverse. It Takes a Revolution, Forget the Scandal Industry. It's a great book. It's a wonderful gift for Christmas, Hanukkah, whatever you might be celebrating, or if you just want to read it at home by yourself. We'll be back next week with another session of the Citizens Grand Jury. Larry, thank you to you.
God bless you to what you do and support Crowdsource the Truth. You're very valuable because you tell the truth.
Thank you, Larry. People can support this show by going to subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth or patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth.